Henry is a lesson in what to do. I've talked to you guys many times. And where does Kevin Lee fit into it for my longtime followers? But Kevin Lee, when he came to the top and he went all the way to the world title, multiple main events, and how he got there is a lesson to be studied. There are not guys who got there the same way as him. In professional wrestling, they call it going into business for yourself. That is where you were supposed to go out. You've got a segment. It's factored in by Vince, which is now who's Triple H. And you don't follow the script. You believe that you have an idea that will get over with the audience better than what you're being asked to read. Oh, and by the way, while it does serve the company, it is going to serve you, and it's going to lift you. And by the way, if you get it wrong, you know the consequence. But there are a number of guys who have done it. Stone Cold Steve Austin, the night he became Stone Cold Steve Austin, went into business for himself. He was not supposed to say Jake 316. He was not supposed to say Austin 316 says I'm going to whip your ass. Did that all on his own, just for example. Now, what Kevin did was truly incredible. And even if you're seeing less of it now, Colby very much did the same thing, and Henry Cejudo. And all three of these guys started popping up. They said, wow, the UFC sure got behind them. And the UFC's sending camera crews, and they're breaking off footage, and they're putting all these things out for these guys that are just in there talking about themselves. They're not even selling a show. They're not even talking about on sales. They're not talking about .coms to go to get merchandise. They're not talking about events with specific locations and dates. They were talking about themselves. The UFC doesn't usually do it that way. And it took the audience almost a year before they realized, oh, the UFC's not even producing this. These guys have gone and hired their own production companies out of their own pocket, putting these types of things out. I'm just sharing for you, those three guys, truly, Kevin Lee, Henry Cejudo, Colby Covington, got to the top and held their positions that were on shaky ground like everybody else, and they did it differently. Now, I like what Henry's done. And Henry's in a spot right now that's confusing to me. And if it's confusing me, I suspect it confuses others. So, just in the last 2 weeks, okay, Henry has not only said he wants to go back to 125 pounds, like that's why I'm going to go back to 125 pounds. Well, it's very different the way he said it. It was much more of an announcement of I'm going back to 125 pounds. I mean, he laid out a roadmap. He laid out why he was going back. He laid out who he was going to fight in his return. It was one of these things. I thought it was an announcement. I took it as an announcement. I thought Henry's now 125 pounder. That is what I thought for 2 weeks until last night when he called out Sugar Sean O'Malley. Now Henry and Sean have never got it right. I am completely into that. I want to bring Dominic Cruz into that mix, and let's get Arizona. Arizona's only so big, man. This would not work in Oregon. I'm telling you. If you got 3 hammers all in the same weight class, we would all be in the same gym. The state's not big enough. We don't have 3 gyms that can support it. Well, Arizona's not much bigger. They do. I could only imagine the heat around those 3 guys. Now, I'm only suggesting that, like, Henry did nothing wrong. I'm going back to it being confusing. And it's a larger issue. It's a larger issue and can create a larger problem that Henry doesn't deserve. Henry deserves to be discussed as the greatest combat athlete of all time. And whether you want to resist that statement or you want to anoint him with that statement, he deserves to be discussed with that statement. Can we agree on that? But he's not getting fights. Now, I've always just assumed it's because he doesn't want one. I've assumed in Henry's position and good standing that when he wants a match, he will ask for one and he will get one very quickly. I've assumed that. It doesn't mean it's so. But see, this is what my point is. The entire point is that if the UFC does not believe that a guy is committed, the UFC only does a couple of things, guys. Regardless of anything that you see and or think or feel that you know as a fan, and a conspiracy is fun, and well, he's just saying that to sell tickets, that's a good time. But if you study it back from the day Dana White got involved in 2001, right? There's a whole nother UFC prior to 2001. There's two different eras to discuss. But with Dana White, they have a fiercely committed and adhered to the integrity of two things. The UFC is for champions and athletes who can be champions. Another way to finish it right after the comma for champions, comma, for athletes who have yet to prove that they can't be champion. As soon as you prove, as soon as it's established that you cannot win the entire thing, your time in the UFC is over. And the other policy, and Dana has never wavered from this, the best will fight the best. There was a year called 2012, and there was a number of suitors for the UFC that wanted to buy the whole thing. By a number of suitors, there was 3. They wanted to buy the whole thing. And one of those suitors was Vince McMahon. And Vince was not a fight fan, and he really didn't follow it that close. I know he's told people that for years. That's not a work or an angle. He lived in that bubble of WWE. He really didn't. But his son, Shane, who was an excellent businessman himself, did follow it. And Shane is the one that talked to his dad, and they had a price of $1.1 billion. If I'm wrong, it was $1.2 billion. I used to know the 3 suitors, and I used to know exactly why, and I still do know what the offers were, but I could assign them to the wrong person. And Vince looked at it. And he looked at it, and he considered it, he got the numbers, and he looked at it, he got his team together, and he looked at it. And finally, when Vince passed, he passed while making the statement, "It is not possible to have a champion if you can't control the outcome." So, boy, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's largely what boxing has done as well. Very hard to know what to do or who to push. I mean, I carry a guy in some degree. Now, Vince is even different, where his number one revenue is coming from merchandising. We can't quite relate to that in MMA. But Vince has to know whose shirts to have, whose boxes of shirts am I ordering 20,000 of these for, right? Pretty easy to know. And how you're going to move them when you know what the outcomes are going to be. And you know what arenas to have these shirts in, because this guy's going over in the main event. I'm just sharing for you, right? A little bit of a different model. But Dana sure does not have that opinion. And history said in 2012 that Vince was right. History said Vince was right. And Dana never had that opinion. And has created stars. Has nothing to do with outcomes. He has stars that then can't defend. He has stars that then can't win in the first place. I'm just saying, right? Like it was very interesting to see how that aged. But the reason I'm taking the time to tell you of these two policies, the best will fight the best, and the UFC is only for champions and people that can become champions, if the organization feels, and they're going to take you at your word, by the way. If you say I want to do 5 fights this year, it doesn't mean you're going to get them, but they will believe that you would like them. If you say I'm going to do 3 more and I'm done, they will believe you. Now, maybe you said it, hoping that somebody will go, no, come on, you got 10 more left in you. They'll believe you. They will take you at your word. And my only concern for Henry is that the UFC is not convinced that Henry really wants to come back and or take on a full schedule. Henry does so oftentimes, and it was something that I really liked about the Sean call-out, by the way. That fight isn't going to happen. I'm sharing the idea. 2 former world champions. There are not very many world champions floating around divisions. There are not very many former world champions that you could even get on the docket with. 135 pounds, and this is off the top of my head, guys. I could produce right now for you 9 names. 9 world champions that are still competing at the highest level, 135 pounds. Could you imagine? But and so I like that Henry's calling him out because, see, now that's not a title fight. Now Henry is showing he's willing to do something besides title fights. I like that. I just want Henry to be really clear. And if I'm confused, hey, do you want Sean at 135? Were you going down to 25? If you go to 25, are you willing to do multiple fights? And if you get the title, then you're willing to defend it, do this fair and square until somebody takes this off you. I mean, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to do it at 35? Henry's not keeping this from us, and Henry's not trying to confuse us. Henry himself hasn't fully decided. And that's the part I'm bringing to you. Henry watches the channel. I'm talking right to you, Henry. I'm just doing it in front of everybody. You have supporters out there. I am one of them. You have people that like your story and will tell your story. I am one of them. I'm confused right now on the story. I'm confused right now on the competitiveness, not on your skills, not on your abilities. I know how good you are. I know you're still good. I know your prime is still here. I know your age. I know all about it. You still have that eye of the tiger. To win the Olympic gold, you didn't show up and wrestle for the Olympic gold. You had to take out 3 of the baddest men in the world in the same day before you had the opportunity to go for the Olympic gold. It's the same thing you did when you got the UFC gold. Do you still have that mindset? Yes or no?